Hey, hockey fans, welcome to the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Retta. I've spent over 4 decades working in the game, fortunate enough to meet some of the legends of the game, saw them come into the league, watched them shine in the game, and now they've moved on to life after hockey. The 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast gives us a chance to catch up, tell some great stories, relive some great memories, and hear what they're up to today. Today's NHL legend, a Stanley Cup champion with the Avs in 2001, assistant coach now with the Red Wings. Please welcome to the show, Alex Tanguay. Alex, great to have you with us, buddy. For those who are watching on video, I got to say, it is so weird to see the Red Wings logo on your jersey.
It is weird. I've had it happen twice, in the course of my hockey career. And, for those knowing me, I grew up just outside of Quebec City. So I was a huge Nordiques fan, Peter Stastny, Michel Goulet, Joe Sakic, all those guys. So when I did play that 1 year for the Canadians, that first time I put that jersey was a little bit, I felt a little bit off. Well, certainly like coming to Detroit and having the Red Wings logo, it took a little bit to get used to, especially after the rivalries that we had with them in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh my gosh. Because I grew up in the original 6 era. So where guys wouldn't even go, they'd play back-to-backs Friday in Montreal, Saturday in Toronto, and they wouldn't even want to be anywhere near each other on the same train back in the days of train. So the whole animosity is so weird. Another thing that's got to be weird, and I want to start with this with you. After decades of playing the game, sitting on the bench, you're now sitting behind the bench and trying to communicate to players things that coaches tried to communicate to you for decades. It's still fresh for you. You've been there for a couple of years, but it's still kind of new in the learning curve. What's that adjustment been like for you?
Well, it's been very interesting because now I looked at some of the coaches that coached me before. I was like, oh my God, what a pain I must have been when I was a player. Because, like as a player, you're the one that control the outcome. You have the solution because the solutions are not on the video. The solution, we can talk all we want, but the solutions are done on the ice. So basically the actors are the one, like controlling the whole outcome of what's happening. So It's about building relationship. It's about building leadership. It's about building trust with those players that you're doing things for them to get better. So it's been an adjustment, but there's no doubt about it. Gino, you asked me which one I would rather do. There's no chance I'd go back to play. This is, like you control the outcome, and it's a lot less hour. It's a lot more fun, and the pay is a lot better. So
yeah, no kidding. I understand that. So let's take back our audience back to where you were and where it all began. You were a first rounder, 12th overall. In the NHL draft. You got a good seat. You got a good start to your NHL career with 17 goals and 51 points. What was that like for you personally, making that transition? And how are you able to communicate and help? Because you got a lot of young guys in Detroit. How do you help them make that transition?
Well, it's unique. Every situation and every player comes into a different role, different situation. Like for me, when I got into Colorado, I was one of the extras that was coming in to trying to help the team. I didn't have to be, at the forefront of the transition. I mean, we had the Sakic, the Forsberg, the Patrick Waugh, Ray Bork tagged along that year, Rob Blake, all those guys. So we had an elite team. So it was just about me finding a way to be a part, to contribute a little bit and get myself to the level where I could play. My first year, I had a really good season. Like you said, for a rookie, I got lucky. You play with some of those players at time, which certainly helps you immensely as to put some of those numbers. But I got in the playoffs, and literally by the third round, I remember Bob Hartley putting me on the ice for minute 30, a minute 48, 2 minutes. That was my game against Dallas. I wasn't quite ready for it. Physically, mentally, the season had taken its toll on me. I wasn't quite ready with some of the details, and the coaches couldn't trust me in some of the situation. So then you go home and you analyze that situation in the summer, and you're like, well, what am I doing here? Like, I want to be that guy that next year that in the playoff, I'm dependent. They can depend on me. I can have those minutes. I can help the team. And sure enough, the next year for me was the year where our team was, again stacked, and we went all the way and won the Stanley Cup. And I felt like I was ready at that time to play and contribute. But when you do have, players like for us in an organization like Detroit, where they come in and they need – they need to be at the forefront pretty much right away, because we're still a team that's rebuilding and accumulating assets to get ourselves back to the level of the Red Wings of the, late 90s, early 2000s. Well, those guys, they have different roles. They play with probably players that are not as good as, Joe Sakic and Peter Forsberg, like I did. They
Yeah.
come way more under the spotlight right away because, that's the next wave of player coming, where I came into a building, like I knew 100% that those Sakic and Forsberg, that's what people were coming in to see the building. Now, some of our guys, they come to the building and they have that expectation almost to raise the team's expectation, to raise the bar for the team, to have their eyes on them when people are coming to watch the game. So you just try to put them in context as to what they need to do. How do you yourself get better as a player within the confine of the teams, and with yourself, personally, how do you get to be, the players you want to be in the long term?
It's interesting you mentioned, and I'm going to get to all these big names, Hockey Hall of Fame legends that you had an opportunity to play with. I want to start, though, with a rather unique situation. Whenever you bring a kid in, you want him to bill it with a family who's going to take care of him, make sure that he's responsible. Do you want to tell our audience about your billet in your rookie season with Colorado?
Yeah. So I was pretty fortunate. When I got to Colorado, I was still, just 19 years old. And, the team felt that at that time, like it would be better for me just to bill it with somebody. It's just to have the, not to worry about anything else. Just they knew that hockey was going to be enough. So Pierre Lacroix was looking for someone, and all of a sudden Patrick is like, yeah, I'll take him. So Patrick Roy and his family took me home. So it was, it was honestly like for a kid, dreaming about hockey, loving hockey. You get to go to the NHL. You're thrilled about, becoming an NHL player. And then all of a sudden, your first year in the NHL, you're living with one, possibly the greatest players that has played this game in Patrick. You look at everything that he's done. So it was a unique experience. And Gino, to add to that, so my first year, I was still living at Patrick's house at that time. And in March, we made a trade for Ray Bourque that year. So Ray came to live in a similar neighborhood that we were at. So on game days, because Ray's wife was coming in, and Patrick's wives were coming to the game, so they would take the car. But I was driving Patrick and Ray Bourque to the game, on the nightly basis. I was like, oh my God, if I get into a crash here, like I'm never gonna see the end of it. So I've got Patrick to my right, I've got Ray in the back seat when the family was in town. I was like, okay, now this hockey thing is real.
That's hilarious. That's gold. I've never heard that story before, that you were their Uber driver. Did they tip well? Did they give you a 5-star rating or no?
I don't think I'll ever make up whatever they've given me. They were,
that's hilarious.
Outstanding people. And it's fun, like you see, like for the casual fans and for the hockey amateur, like even the reporters, you don't see the real personality sometimes of those guys until, like when you're on a day-to-day basis with them, you become friends with them, and you see a different part of their world. And it was great. It was fun to see.
We're in conversation with Stanley Cup champion Alex Tanguay, now an assistant coach of the Detroit Red Wings. This is the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Reda. You keep throwing out some legends of the game. You got an opportunity to play with some of the great legends of the game. You were, during your time in Colorado, you got to play on the JAM line, the JAM line, which was J for Joey Sakic, the A for Alex Tanguay, and the H for Hayduk, as in Milan Hayduk. So Joey's one of the greatest all-around players in the history of the game. Absolute legend, and now legend as well in management. Hayduk, one of the all-time great finishers, and yourself often considered one of the best playmakers of all time. And Joey Sakic actually had his 50-goal season with you and won a Hart Trophy with you. What was it like to go from a young guy who grew up idolizing Joey Sakic to suddenly not only being in the same dressing room, but a lot of times being on the same line with this guy?
Well, like to go back to the start, my first training camp, I go to Colorado, and back then, like this is the old NHL where you had roommates, and so we get to Colorado Springs for training camp, and the first day of training camp, like Bob Hartley had put me with, so I'm rooming with Joe Sakic. So I'm this kid that grew up idolizing Joe, and now you get in a situation where I was in awe, like almost to the point of not talking. I wanted to see what he was doing. I wanted to learn from him. But then you get on the ice, and on the ice, those guys have a job to do. So if I wanted to play on Joe's line, I had to elevate my game. I had to be doing different things. And when you're a young guy, like for me, like I was lucky. Bob Hartley was a good coach for me, but we had a guy by the name of Brian Trottier that was an assistant coach, and Brian was, had played the game at such an elite level that you want to be a sponge. And Brian would always say, like, you've got to do those things that will get Joe touches. If you get Joe touches, he's going to make you look good. And, like knowing Joe, the career that he's had and where he stands in the hockey stature, it was, it was a great experience, and it was a learning curve. At first, I was struggling first to keep up to his pace. I think that my first year, my feet weren't good enough to keep up to the speed at which he was playing at. My reaction was a little bit slow, so you got to get yourself older. But what an opportunity! I mean, playing with him that year in 2001 when we won the Stanley Cup, he was the I think he finished second to Yager in scoring that year. He was league MVP, scored 50 plus goal. He was the best player in the game at that point. It was, lucky I was very lucky to play with him. But, Milan and I would have, with playing with guys like that also comes great responsibilities.
Yeah.
And it was the responsibilities that we wanted to have and that you wanted to keep, because that you could coattail him to success really rather easily.
Yeah, the smart thing, get on the puck. Get on the puck. If you get on the puck, good things will happen. And they did. Here's a funny thing I find, Alex. I mean, there are a lot of markets. You're from Quebec. You understand exactly what it's like to play in a Canadian team. You can't walk anywhere. You can't go grab a coffee without somebody recognizing you, especially you were a first-round draft pick, early first-round draft pick. If you're playing in a big major market at that point in your career, you can't go outside without being recognized. So let me take you back to a story you tell, and I want you to tell it for our audience. It's Christmas time. Your brother comes to visit. I think he was probably around 12 at that point. And for whatever reason, you guys decide you're going to go play some shinny locally in Colorado. Can you tell our audience that story on how that unfolded and what happened?
So, that's funny. My brother was also drafted in the NHL, but he's 9 years younger than me. So I was somewhat his idol growing up. I had, like a big age difference and stuff like that. And that year in 2001, my whole family came in for Christmas. So my two brothers came in, and this one's much younger. So we go to Evergreen in Colorado, and in Evergreen, they've got beautiful mountain settings and they've got the lakes at the bottom. So you've got a great environment to have, hockey rinks. So they've got this major lake that's frozen, all kinds of hockey rink. My brother and I are skating there, and we're skating, and as we're skating, it just so happened that pickup game breaks out. And the pickup game, everybody puts their stick in the middle, and I've got my toque, my brother is there, and there's like 4 or 5 guys. I was like, they put their stick in the middle. I was like, no. I was like, and they were beginners. They were not great skaters. So, I knew we could take care of them. I was like, no. I was like, how about you 4 against us 2? And they're like, with this little guy? I was like, yeah, I think we'll be fine. So then all of a sudden we start playing, and I'm just messing around, and I wouldn't score. I would let my little brother score it. But, little did they know that they had no chance when it began with. And after it ended, I said, well, guys, I said, you were in for, you were in for a tough one after, one of their friends came in and found out who I was. So signed a couple autographs, and it was all good after that.
Could you imagine the story these kids are telling? Yeah, Tanguay, he won the Stanley Cup, but just a couple of months before he won the Stanley Cup, we were actually playing shinny with him. Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. Yeah. That would have been good for them to have cell phones back there. Hopefully they took some cell phone pictures, because who would believe a story like that, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you have a tremendous season in your second year, your sophomore season, and you have a great Stanley Cup playoff run. Obviously, it ends in the storybook end, and you had 21 points, including the game winner, the Stanley Cup clinching goal in Game 7 versus the Devils, in just your second season with the Avs. What was that entire run like for you?
Well, like I told you previously, I think that the key factor into this was that I did not play the year before, and I told myself that summer that never is this ever going to be happening again. When we're going to get in the playoff, the team's going to be dependent on me. I'm going to have an important role for the team. So that was the key factor of the summer training and the build up through that whole season, and then got ourselves to the playoffs. And the goal from day one of the regular season was to have home ice advantage. The team had lost the previous 2 years in Game 7 at home against Dallas, and we knew that, in the tight game in the playoffs, we wanted that Game 7 to be at home. And throughout the course, we won the first round rather easily. I think it was 4-0 against Vancouver. And then we played the second round. We had a Game 7. We were up 3-1 on LA. They won Game 5. They win Game 6. We came home for Game 7, and we win that one. Go on, beat St. Louis in 5. And, in a tight series, the third round, everybody says 5, but there was 3 or 4 overtime game in that playoff round. And then you go and you have the Stanley Cup finals. So now you're in the finals. But what most people and most fans don't remember about, our team that won is that in the second round, Joe Sakic was hurt, missed 3 or 4 games against LA, if I remember properly. And then we wake up after beating LA in Game 7, and possibly, one of the 2-3 best player in the world with Joe and Patrick and those guys, Peter Forsberg's not going to play the next 2 rounds, having his spleen removed. So now all of a sudden you get yourself in a much more important role. So it was great. It was a great run. It was a lot of fun. For me, it played out at the end. I had decent playoffs. I had good playoffs, but until Game 5 of the Stanley Cup playoff, I just had 2 goals. So I produced, but I could not find the back of the net. Yeah. And it just played out that the hockey gods paid me back at the end. Scored Game 5, scored Game 6, and then Game 7 was, I guess it was my turn to score, where I had a couple goals in that game.
What was that like at the moment that it was the clock actually ticks down to 0? It's over. You're a Stanley Cup champion, and you get to parade the cup around the ice.
It's unreal. You have so many emotions that come through. The gratitude of what everybody, previous coaches, family members, parents, what people have done for you in your career. You have the accomplishment, the accomplishment of a lifetime. This is what you've worked for your whole life, and you were able to achieve it. But I think the most important thing for me is the friendship that you've built. It is hard for every single one of those players. You've made sacrifices along the way. You've had bumps and bruises. You've had battles, with the guys next to you. And then all of a sudden, as a group collectively, you're able to, achieve this goal. It's a very unique feeling. It's a feeling that, honestly, I tell this all the time. Unfortunately, I just won 1 Stanley Cup, but you don't realize after you win one, how happy, how excited you are, and how much you want it back again. And I don't know if I like the Stanley Cup more or hated losing every other year, that it's not going to be your turn parading the Stanley Cup, because how much joy it brings to not only yourself but people around you. So it's honestly very unique. It's a special achievement for sure.
We're in conversation with Stanley Cup champion Alex Tanguay. This is the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Retta. So after 6 very strong seasons with the Avs, which included a Stanley Cup, you get traded to the Flames in 2006. And it's kind of a mixed bag for you. Starts off great. You have a career best 81 points in 81 games in your first year as a Flame. But in year 2, and let's be honest, your career also came, while it started fantastic and some great things happened, you also had some bumps along the road, which included Mike Keenan comes in as the head coach in year 2 with the Calgary Flames. And almost right from the outset, as soon as he came in, we all know what Iron Mike was like. He wants to let everybody know who's in charge, and that created some serious animosity along the way. What was that like when all of a sudden he steps in? You're a guy who's tremendously successful at doing what you do. Great playmaker, a great points guy, and now all of a sudden he comes in there and wants to change the style of your play.
Well, Gino, sometimes, experience leads you to different things. And, after I retired, and even, through the time that you're playing, you analyze every situation that comes along, and to that point, the getting traded, after the salary cap, you sort of knew what was happening, but it was hard because Colorado had become home. This is where I went from, a teenager to an adult man. I had my adult friendship, was there. So it was hard to move to Calgary.
Yeah.
But, as a player, like you've got to go out, you've got to play. And I played okay. It wasn't great the first year. I played, I played okay. And then the second year, I blame
Alex, you had
myself.
81 points. You had a point per game. That's better than okay.
Yeah, no, I was back then. I was a good player. I mean, the
Yeah.
year previous to that, like the year that Marty St. Louis won, I was tied or right around tied when I
Yeah.
missed the last 13 games with Marty. So, but and for any players, the most important attribute that you could always have is your confidence and the belief in yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that when Mike came on board, we had some challenges, early in the year. He challenged me with different things, and like, as opposed to keep believing myself, and in sports in general, all you have to do is to prove yourself day in and day out. That's why the greats, you look at Sidney Crosby now, who's probably been the best players for the last 20 years. What does he do? On a daily basis, he comes out and he's better than, everybody else before. He proves himself over and over again. And at that point, I felt entitled a little bit. And as opposed to fight and go prove, Mike, in that instance, that I was better, I let the situation be okay. And so those are tools, Gino, that I regret as a player. Those are tools now that serves me as a coach, because, like, I've been in those situations. I've lived those situations where I was a really good player and where I was a really average player at times. And I think that I've learned to grow within those situations, but certainly having to go back, I'm not blaming Mike at all. Mike was a coach, and the coach, and back then, now it's changed a little bit, but back then, like, the coach were, I wouldn't say the bully, but they were the dominating factor in the room, and that was their way, or it wasn't going to be any other way. And at that point, like, I should have, put my work boots and, like, not felt entitled and go earn my thing, because if I would have done it, I know that, I was good enough to be doing, the things that I did the previous year.
Good for you, Alex, to kind of take ownership of that and say that you learned from that. That's amazing, because that must help you to communicate that message, because you can go to kids who you're coaching now and say, I know what you're going through. I know what you're feeling. I understand your experience. And there's validity to that when you share a story like that with them.
Sometimes, it takes time. Like, for me, Gino, it took me years, to realize that, like, what I did and stuff like that. And that's why, when you look at my career, there was a few years where I had a little bit of a dip, like a little bit of a dip. And the dip is not the players that's not as good. It's just that you don't make the best out of that situation. Now, does that mean you look at different players in the NHL and they go to different situations, and sometimes they're in a situation where they don't play well the year before and they play well the year after. And sometimes situation helps. Players that you play with help that situation. But there's also that belief and the inner, work ethic and the inner attitude that you bring in on a daily basis that will allow you to get, to the level of success that you want to have.
Yeah. You handled it really well, though. I mean, when things were difficult, you went to who was the general manager at that point, Daryl Sutter, and you said, listen, this is not working out. Can we make a deal work? And all Sutter asked you was, let's just keep it quiet now, and we'll figure something out in the off season. In the off season, he comes to you with an opportunity to go to the Montreal Canadiens. He's got a trade to go to the Habs. You're a French Canadian. You grew up not far from Montreal. You understand that now, like, Colorado was one thing. You can do things out of the limelight. Calgary was another thing, somewhat of a limelight, but not to the extent of Montreal. And you were concerned about possibly going to Montreal. That wasn't an easy decision for you to make, was it?
It wasn't. Like, going to Montreal was, for a French Canadian, you're going to be on the spotlight, and only have, like, you go to most markets, you have to answer one set of media. You go to Montreal, you have to answer in French, you have to answer in English. You go to the grocery store, and there's, for people that don't know, at that time there was 3 live hour TV shows after games. So basically, like, there's not a single minute of the game that's not being exposed, and you've got these, hockey expert or former players that are on those panels that are not quite in the room, but they have enough of a say that they control the media narrative. Yeah. So then all of a sudden you find yourself at the grocery store and people are bumping their carts, like, is that true? What this and this said? Is this what's happening in the room?
Oh my
and
gosh.
It becomes reality, which is unique, I'm so thankful that I've got this that I've had this opportunity to be in Montreal, to be a Montreal Canadiens, to live that New York Yankees lifestyle where you're a star wherever you go. It's a very unique experience. It's not made for everyone. And obviously when you win in Montreal, it must be unbelievable. But, like I went there for 1 year. For me, it was, played really well. Got an unfortunate injury, separated my shoulder in Tampa and missed 30 some games, but I had a really good, and for some reason, because of the injury and the timing of the injury that I missed, I was sort of the forgotten guy in that situation. And then the next summer they made major changes, new coach, new organization. So I moved on to somewhere else, but it affected me because I played really good in Montreal. I played on the line with Saku Koivu early in the year, and he was a great player. We had tremendous chemistry for some reason. Like I got hurt and we get on separate, lines a little bit, but it was honestly like playing in Montreal for a French Canadian kid. It makes you feel like you're a rock star for sure.
And you had 6 goals, 17 points in your first month with the Habs. So you exploded onto the scene there. You won player of the month and you were third on the team in scoring. And you mentioned briefly, and I want to revisit that, you got hit by Evgeny Artukin back in Tampa, which separated your shoulder and knocked you out for 2 months. What's that like when things are clicking so well, things are going good, the transition's been good, and then all of a sudden one incident like that just rips you out? That has got to be incredibly mentally tough on you.
It is, and I was excited to go to Montreal. It was the last year of my contract, so I had things to prove. It was a new opportunity. Obviously, Guy Carbonneau was the coach, and now you go and you miss 2 months. And during the time that I went away, the team was kind of spiraling sideways a little bit. Not too sure at that time if we're going to be in the playoffs or not. And so you're trying to fight. You're trying to get back in the lineup as soon as possible. You do pretty much everything that they're referring to or they want you to do to get back. And then the first game I got back, I remember we played in Atlanta, the one game, and then the game after Bob Gainey had fired Guy Carbonneau. So now all of a sudden you get caught in the mix of all this. You're trying to refine your game. You're trying to adjust to different things. And when you come back from injuries, as much as you say, we all see, in the media, we see the superstars. We see the Gretzky, the Lemieux, the Sakic, the Crosby, they get back and right away it's their typical game. But for any other human, when you come back into the lineup, there's a little bit of an adjustment. You're a little step behind. You've missed a couple months. You don't find your spots right away. You don't find your rhythm right away. You're fighting to get back to that level. And by the time I got back and felt better in the playoff, I came back a little early with the shoulder, and Zdeno Chara hit me right, in the playoff, and it started, and then played 2 games in the playoff, and it's like it affected my playing. Like I said, that part of my career, I wanted that year to have a good year, and the fact that at the end of the season you get there and you're sort of forgotten, it affected me. Certainly mentally for my own personal belief, big time.
I want to follow up on that to whatever comfort level you have for it. I remember at that point, I was covering obviously your career working with TSN at that point, and you said, and I don't want to misquote you, but I think you said, "I feel like I've forgotten how to play" during your time with Tampa. What was going through your mind at that point where you were feeling like that emotionally?
Well, I'll put you in context, So that summer, like I'm a guy that, a couple years ago, and even in Montreal, you mentioned the first month, like I was a very, very good at that point NHL player. I wasn't a superstar, but I was a good player that, could help, most teams. And then you get yourself at the end of the year, the Montreal Canadiens are going to pass, and I'm not going to name, like they go a different direction.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you're looking at yourself, well, July 1st, what's going to happen? And July 1st, literally, like, I don't know if it was how it played out, but I didn't get very many phone calls that year. It didn't pan out on July 1st. And all of a sudden, it's August 1st and you still don't have a contract. And in my mind, like I was doubting myself. Which, as a player, that's the one thing that you cannot do. And for any kids out there, the one thing that you can't do is doubt yourself. I was still the same player as that I was a year before, now I was just going to have to go out and reprove it all over again, which, I knew that I could do, but for some reason it affected me. And then multitude of different things went on to that Tampa year where, like, for example, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with stomach cancer. She passed 6 months later. All those things add up that, like, even though as a player, you're not supposed to let them affect you, I let the situation affect my mental belief in myself. And then, I let outside situation affect, how, I perform on the ice. And in Tampa, like, honestly, like, I, I almost feel bad for how poorly I played. I'm still to this day, like, I'm thankful for the career I've had. I'm still somewhat, like, somewhat embarrassed by the level of, play that I did there. And that's why after that, I went and signed a 1-year deal, a prove me deal with the Calgary Flames, because I knew that Daryl liked me. I knew that Daryl and Brent was the coach at that time. I knew that they were going to give me a chance, and I wanted to restart my career. And that's why I took this deal. I didn't even hesitate. Like on July 1st, when Daryl came calling, it was like, it was a yes right away, that I wanted to have that opportunity again.
Wow, Alex, I got to tell you, man, this is a whole side of you I've never seen before. It's great. I mean, I remember covering your career through the turmoil that you went through the separated shoulder, through the struggles you had with Mike Keenan, and through your tremendous successes and stuff. How, like, what's that transition been like for you? I mean, did you just kind of sit back and self-analyze and just kind of reevaluate how you got to it? How did you come to this such a clear understanding?
Well, Gino, it's very interesting, because when you retired, like, it leaves a big void for any athletes. You talk to any athletes, and you think of their time after they retired. You retired from the job that you do for the most, like, the players that are playing in my generation, for the most part, they've made enough money that, you can pick your work. You don't have to go to work on the next day. You can sort of pick your situation and do things that way. But for me, I sat there and I analyzed what I want to do for the rest, for the next 20 years of my life. And the passion for hockey was still there. And I didn't know how much I wanted to do at first. And after I retired, I did a little bit of TV, but through that TV time in the US, I worked at the NHL Network. I did a little, thing for RDS at times. And I was still involved with the game because I enjoyed it, but I did not want to do too much. And through that time, like, I reflected on my career, like, why did those things happen? Like, if I wanted to be good at working in this game again, I have to understand how this game worked for me. And the fact that I had this playing career, that I'd been around this game for so long, gives me that experience and give me a perspective of what happened for me. But not only for me, like, I went back to different situation with different teams, for different players, for different organization, for different timing of teams, that you get in situation, and every situation is unique and different, but it gives you ideas or perspective as to what happened in previous time and how those things played out. So, and then after a couple of years of media and a couple of years of reflecting, I was starting to get the hitch to get back at it. And at that time, Paul Fenton was the GM, and Tom Kerbers in Minnesota, GM and assistant GM. And then I went to be an assistant coach in Iowa in their minor league team for a couple of years.
Something that always struck me, and this was, I mean, we hear fans in the stands constantly yelling, shoot, and that happened to you a lot in your career. And for those who don't know, let's explain. We're in conversation with Alex Tanguay, Stanley Cup champion. This is the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm Gino Reda. You were there are some that would argue that your numbers could have been even higher than they were. You put together some great career numbers if you were a little more selfish. I remember Jokinen and Iginla talking about when you played with them. They said he could get us the puck when we were thinking, there's no way I'm open. And Tanguay could get us the puck. And he would always, like, he would have an empty net to shoot at, but he would get it to us. Then we got a wide open net because people thought, why isn't he shooting? You're always a pass first guy. And you had a shooting percentage in the 05-06 and 06-07 season that was over 23%, Alex. Like, so were there times where you thought, maybe I should just shoot the puck more?
Oh, for sure. Like, and looking at, like, now, coaching, being every day on the video and stuff like that, and you see a situation and you see how much is created by shooting sometimes, like different players will have different, assets. You look at Patrick Kane, for example, like he values the puck, like he's not going to make a bad play with the puck, but he does shoot the puck, and the shot, creates so much more. So it's something that at that time perhaps did not understand to the level that I do now. I certainly value the puck. I don't think that I would have ever been a 300 shot guy. I didn't think my shot was, worth that much, but I enjoy passing. To me, hockey is a bit of it's like playing chess. You're moving the pieces, you're moving your eyes, you're moving your shoulders, you're moving. And I would at the time, study guys like Joe Thornton and study guys like Adam Oates and study guys like Nick Backstrom. Even when Nick came into the NHL, like how do they move? Does everybody know that Nick Backstrom is making that pass over to Alex Ovechkin, but yet nobody can save it? And there's so many subtleties to that I won't elaborate on, but there's so many subtleties that you can do in order to make that. And that was the thing that for me, maybe that's why I passed so much, Gino, is that I like that. That was what I liked most probably about the game, and maybe, is to my downfall a little bit, but it is what it is.
I want to wrap up. Before I do, though, I want to get your impression on something. Something just comes to my mind right now, and it's always fun to watch a player, especially somebody of a star status like yourself, who's an early round draft pick, and watch your skill set and the way you can bring that skill set to the next level and then continue to develop your game. Something that stands out to me is not only do you continue to develop your game, you continued to develop mentally and learning. And it seemed to me like the entire process along, you just became to understand yourself, your game, and what you were doing more and more as you went along in your career. And now it sounds like you've continued that process post career. Am I right in that? Have you consciously recognized that? And is that something that you worked on, understanding yourself better and better as you went along?
Absolutely. I think it's part of the process of any young players. You learn to understand not only your game, you learn to understand yourself physically. So what do I need? Because every player is going to need different things. Like some players is going to be the nutrition is going to be really important. Some players, the rest is going to be very important. Some players, what do I need to do with my training in order to get myself in the best possible position to succeed? So, and then you go through all the things that you do, like even away from the ice, like the people that you hang around, the situation that you put yourself into, all those situations, like athletes, and not in a bad way, you become somewhat very, very selfish because it's about you, and your performance is going to dictate what's going to happen to you and how much money you're going to make, and like all those things. So the self-evaluation for any athletes, like if you're not constantly self-evaluating, constantly trying to find ways to get better in those situations, you're cheating yourself. But I must say that when you're going through that process, sometimes, as a player and in the situation that you're put in, asking to perform every day, sometimes the clarity doesn't come until, self-reflection, whether it's after the season, whether it's a couple years after. So that's why, you see a lot of former players that become coach or become advisor, become agent, that help those kids, because, like sometimes even though you hear it from somebody else, you might have to repeat it a few times before you actually grasp the concept of what's happening to you. And I've had I had the luxury of having, a guy. My trainer my whole life was a former soccer player in Europe, and he was my trainer my whole life, and had not played hockey, and literally, like, his career and what he said about how things were going to play out is exactly to a T as to what happened to me, because he had lived it in another sport, but which translate very easily. And literally, like, you look at some of the things that he had said and some of the things we talked about, and I was like, boy, was I naive not to listen the first time he told me about this situation. So he tried to help him as much as possible, try to put guys in different situations. But certainly when you're a player, if you don't self-reflect and if you don't try to improve on a daily basis, well, you're really leaving yourself trailing behind.
And with that, that's the final word. I got to tell you, Alex, this is impressive, man. I'm happy for the kids that you're coaching right now, and I look forward to the time, because it's only a matter of time. If this is what you want, that you'll be a head coach behind an NHL bench, and the guys that you'll be leading will be very, very fortunate to have your insights and abilities to lead them. Congratulations on all you've done during your career and now in the coaching ranks as well. This has been great catching up with you, my friend.
All right, Gino, thanks so much. It was fun.
Stanley Cup champion and now assistant coach with the Detroit Red Wings, Alex Tanguay. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee, fresh 100% premium Arabica coffee, hot from the oven, pizza and wings, a pint of ice cream, or even a carton of milk, eggs, and loaf of bread from the 7 Now app. And Team 7-Eleven will have your order ready for pickup 24/7. If you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. 7-Eleven's Overtime Podcast can be found on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, iTunes Podcast, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Until next week, I'm Gino Retta saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast.